The moment the broadcast cut to the royal studio, something felt wrong. You could see it before you could understand it. The lighting was too bright. The silence behind the cameras was too heavy. And King Charles, seated beneath the shimmering crest of the monarchy, wasn't wearing the expression the world expected from a ruler delivering yet another carefully scripted address. His eyes were wet. His voice trembled even before he spoke. And the nation watching. Millions across screens, phones, tablets, living rooms, leaned forward at the same time, sensing something was about to break. Did you feel it too? That strange electric tension when a person realizes they are witnessing history instead of ceremony? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Because this wasn't a speech. It wasn't an announcement. It was a fracture. A single tear rolled down his cheek, and suddenly the world stopped breathing. Viewers froze. Commentators fell silent. The studio camera operator hesitated, unsure whether to zoom in or cut away. And for the first time in living royal memory, a king looked like a man unraveling. A monarch collapsing under a weight no crown could balance. A leader whose facade had finally cracked under pressures nobody had seen, or perhaps pressures everyone had ignored. Why did that tear fall? What was happening off camera? And most importantly, why now? Those watching felt it in their chests, even if they couldn't explain it. This moment mattered. It wasn't staged. It wasn't polished. It wasn't rehearsed by palace advisors or softened by press secretaries. This was raw, exposed, and terrifyingly real. And if a king could break on live television, what did that say about the future of the monarchy itself? Could an institution built on unshakable image survive vulnerability this public? Or was this the first visible crack in a structure that has been quietly weakening for years? Some viewers thought it was grief. Others thought it was guilt. Some whispered that it was illness. A few murmured that it was betrayal. But none of them knew what came next. None of them could have predicted the chain reaction that moment would unleash. The headlines, the outrage, the speculation, the scramble behind palace walls, all of it ignited the instant that tears slipped down the king's face. And then came the words. Words no one expected. Words spoken not like a ruler delivering a decree, but like a man confessing a secret. His lips trembled. His voice cracked. And the world leaned closer, drawn in by the vulnerability, the shock, the mystery. What could force a king to speak like that? What truth was heavy enough to twist his voice into something strained and human? Have you ever seen a figure of power suddenly look small and felt the room tilt because of it? This was that moment. Every broadcaster stumbled. Every news anchor lost their script. Some tried to fill the silence with commentary, but their voices shook. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, as the king's composure dissolved. Social media erupted instantly. Screenshots, rewinds, slowed-down zooms, subtitles, lip-reading attempts, conspiracy threads. People typed frantically, trying to explain what they themselves did not understand. Did you see it live? Or did you hear about it from someone panicked enough to call you? And still, the king didn't wipe the tear away. He let it fall. He let the world see it. He let the cameras record it forever. And that was when people realized something unimaginable was about to happen. This was not royal emotion. This was surrender. But surrender to what? The pressure of the crown? The shadow of scandal? The burden of truth? The fracture within his family? The secrets the palace had buried for decades? Every person watching supplied their own theory, projecting their own fears. But none of them were prepared for the moment the king gripped the edge of the desk, leaned forward, and whispered a sentence the microphones weren't meant to catch. A sentence that sent shockwaves across every living room, every newsroom, every corner of the internet. A sentence that would be replayed, analyzed, dissected, argued over, and feared. Because when a king says he cannot continue, what happens next? Is the crown passed? Is it seized? Is it refused? Is the monarchy thrown into chaos? Is the nation left leaderless? The emotional weight of the moment grew heavier by the second. People watching felt unsettled, like something sacred was unraveling thread by thread. Children asked their parents what was happening. Older viewers clutched their armrests, remembering coronations, jubilees, wars, abdications. Younger viewers stared, realizing for the first time that a crown doesn't protect a person from being human. And through it all, the camera stayed locked on the king, trembling, blinking, struggling to continue. Why didn't the palace cut the feed? Why didn't an aide intervene? Why didn't the network switch to emergency footage? Because no one knew what to do. This had never happened before. Even those who disliked the crown watched with their mouths open. Even those who mocked the monarchy fell silent. Because it's one thing to criticize an institution, it's another to watch it collapse. And in that moment, collapse felt terrifyingly possible. You could feel it in the air. You could feel it in the way the king inhaled sharply, as if fighting back another wave of emotion. Then he lifted his gaze and looked directly into the camera. Millions felt seen. Millions felt implicated. Millions felt warned. His eyes carried a message he hadn't yet spoken, a message that suggested something had been building behind closed doors. Something buried. Something suppressed. Something that had finally reached a point where silence was no longer possible. What kind of truth forces a king to the brink like that? What revelation could tear through royal stoicism and leave only trembling honesty? The room behind him blurred. The world in front of him froze. And then, just as he opened his mouth to speak again, a voice from off-camera whispered urgently. The king flinched. The microphone caught it. The audience heard it. And suddenly the moment shifted from emotional to alarming. Someone was trying to stop him. Someone was trying to intervene. Someone didn't want the next words spoken. Who was it? Why were they there? What were they afraid he would say? People leaned closer, desperate to catch more. The king shook his head. His hand trembled again, and a chilling realization settled over everyone watching. This was the moment everything changed. Not just for the king, not just for the royal family, not just for the country, but for history itself. Because in 5 minutes, the world had gone from ceremony to crisis. From monarchy to mystery. From tradition to unraveling. And no one knew what the next breath would bring. But they sensed it was coming. They sensed something irreversible was about to happen. And they could not look away. Every viewer felt it. The shift, the dread, the anticipation. And then, with the world watching, the king exhaled, slowly, shakily, and prepared to speak again. The studio lights seemed to flicker, though perhaps it was only the cameras adjusting to the tension radiating through the room. The king's fingers tightened against the polished surface of the desk, knuckles whitening as though he were holding onto the last thread of composure. You could almost feel the collective heartbeat of the nation sink with his hesitation. Was he gathering strength or losing it? Was this the pause before recovery or the pause before collapse? The presenters in the newsroom exchanged panicked glances, unsure whether to break in, narrate, or remain silent. One reached for an earpiece. Another mouthed something no one could hear. The teleprompter kept scrolling, oblivious to the unraveling human being who was supposed to be reading it. And somewhere in that surreal disconnect, the truth became undeniable. The king was no longer following the script. He was speaking from a place raw and unfiltered. Have you ever watched someone you thought was unshakable suddenly crack? Have you ever realized in real time that power doesn't protect a person from pain? That was the sensation gripping the audience. A strange combination of empathy, shock, and fear. Because if a king could reach his breaking point, what did that mean for everyone else? The camera captured a close-up, intentionally or accidentally, bringing his trembling lips and glassy eyes into stark view. His throat tightened visibly. He struggled to form words. And then, almost painfully, he forced out a half-whispered phrase that sent a chill through viewers. He said he could not continue. Not continue what? The sentence was incomplete. The meaning was unclear. And yet the implication felt catastrophic. People leaned toward their screens, desperate for clarification, desperate for context, desperate for the words that would follow. But before he could finish, a rustle came from behind the camera, and the king's eyes flicked toward the sound. That split-second reaction, part fear, part warning, part exhaustion, ignited speculation faster than any headline ever could. Who was there? What were they signaling? Why did the king react like that? Social media exploded again. Some claimed it was an aide. Some claimed it was security. Some claimed it was family. Some claimed it was someone with far more influence than either. And still, the king pressed forward. He inhaled shakily, lifted his chin, and tried to regain his voice. But the tremor didn't leave. The vulnerability didn't fade. The world was seeing something forbidden, a monarch stripped of armor, stripped of distance, stripped of royal insulation. For decades, the public had been told that the monarchy was steady, enduring, unbreakable. But this moment cracked. That image opened like glass under a sudden temperature change. People watching felt a strange mixture of discomfort and fascination. Should they feel sympathy? Should they feel fear? Should they feel curiosity? Nobody knew. And that uncertainty only deepened the tension. Then came something even stranger. The camera shifted, revealing a glimpse of a folded paper resting near the king's hand. It hadn't been there at the beginning of the broadcast, or if it had, no one noticed it until now. Viewers zoomed in. Analysts paused their recordings. Amateur sleuths tilted screens. What was written there? Why was the king glancing at it between breaths? Was it a resignation? A confession? A threat? A message he wasn't supposed to say aloud? The room around him remained painfully still, as though time had thickened. He stared at the paper, then back into the camera, torn between two forces, duty and truth, obligation and breakdown. His voice returned, barely audible, like someone learning how to speak again. He said the weight had become too heavy. What weight? Personal? Political? Familial? Historical? The audience could only guess, and guessing made the moment even more gripping. The broadcast didn't cut away. The anchors didn't interrupt. The palace didn't intervene. And that silence, that suspended, breathless silence, felt louder than any proclamation in royal history. Parents turned up the volume. Teenagers stopped scrolling. Newsrooms scrambled. Politicians paused mid-sentence. Even critics leaned closer, because everyone sensed it. Something irreversible was about to be said. The king swallowed hard, voice thick with emotion, and continued, speaking not as a sovereign, but as a man who carried a secret too heavy to hide any longer. His words hinted at pressures unseen, conversations sealed behind palace doors, decisions made in shadows. And as he spoke, the atmosphere shifted again, from shock to dread. Was this about health? Was this about scandal? Was this about succession? Was this about loyalty? Was this about betrayal? The audience could feel the stakes rising with every syllable. The king's composure wavered again, and he closed his eyes for a brief moment, just long enough for the world to imagine the worst. When he opened them, they were filled with something more than sorrow, something closer to resignation, something that suggested he had crossed a threshold long before the cameras ever turned on. And then, in a trembling voice, he uttered the word no one expected to hear from a reigning monarch. He said he must step down, not someday, not hypothetically, not symbolically. He said it as though the decision had already been made. The world gasped, and then chaos erupted. But what happened after those words left his lips would shake the monarchy in a way no abdication, no scandal, no crisis ever had. And it would begin with something caught by the microphone that was never meant to be heard. The gasp wasn't just metaphorical. It was audible. Someone in the studio drew in a sharp breath, forgetting they were near an active microphone. The sound slipped into the broadcast, amplifying the shock, confirming that even those closest to the king hadn't been prepared for what he had just said. Viewers felt their skin prickle. This wasn't choreography. This wasn't ceremony. This was a moment spiraling out of control. The presenters finally reacted, their professionalism cracking as they scrambled for direction. One began to speak, then stopped. Another tried to transition to a commercial break, but stumbled over their words. The control room voices bled faintly into the audio feed, engineers and producers shouting conflicting instructions. Should they cut the signal? Hold it? Blur it? Delay it? No decision came fast enough, because the king kept talking. He spoke slowly, painfully, as though each word was peeled from somewhere deep within him. He said the burden had become unbearable. He said the expectations no longer aligned with reality. He said the truth could no longer remain hidden. His voice trembled, but his message grew clearer. Something had pushed him past the point of endurance. And that was when the camera caught something chilling. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the frame, barely visible but unmistakably present. The king's eyes darted toward them again, and this time the audience noticed. The internet erupted instantly. Freeze frames, contrast adjustments, guesses, theories. Who was standing there? Why weren't they stepping forward? Why did the king look torn between fear and defiance? The tension deepened. The king's breathing grew heavier, and he pressed his hand flat against the desk, steadying himself. His other hand brushed against the folded document, the one viewers still couldn't decipher. as if drawing strength or certainty from whatever it contained. His lips parted again, ready to continue, ready to reveal more, ready to cross a boundary no monarch had crossed in modern history. But before he could speak, the audio crackled and another voice, hushed, firm, urgent, said his name. Not, Your Majesty. Not, Sir. Not any title expected when addressing a king. Just his name. Charles. The familiarity in that voice sent shivers through viewers. Who could speak to a reigning monarch that way, in the middle of a broadcast, and with that tone? Was it a family member? A confidant? Someone whose authority rivaled his own? Or someone whose influence operated out of sight? The king closed his eyes, and for a moment, it looked as though he might stop, as though the unseen voice had pulled him back from the edge, as though the broadcast might end with ambiguity instead of catastrophe. But then he shook his head. A small movement, but unmistakably resolute. He was going to continue. Millions felt their hearts race. The king lifted his gaze once more, meeting the camera with an expression that blended sorrow, determination, and something that looked dangerously close to liberation. His voice strengthened, even through the tremor. He said the decision was final. He said the truth would be spoken. He said the monarchy could not continue as it had. And then he leaned forward, as if to deliver the line that would explain everything. That was when the feed cut out. Abruptly, jarringly, without warning. Screens went black. Newsrooms froze. Phones were raised. Social media detonated. People thought their televisions had malfunctioned. Others believed the network had suffered a technical failure. Some swore it was intentional, a forced blackout to prevent the king from finishing his statement. And before anyone could form a conclusion, the feed returned, but the king was gone. The chair sat empty. The desk remained. The crest gleamed. But the monarch had vanished. In his place, a stunned presenter stumbled through a scripted placeholder line, claiming there were unexpected technical adjustments, though the panic in their eyes betrayed the lie. Viewers shouted at their screens, demanding answers. What happened? Where did he go? Was he escorted out? Did he collapse? Was he silenced? Was he safe? The questions multiplied faster than anyone could contain. Government officials refused to comment. Royal press secretaries issued no statement. Palace gates closed. Helicopters hovered. Reporters gathered like storm clouds. And still, no explanation. People replayed the footage repeatedly, trying to interpret clues. The tear, the trembling, the whisper, the document, the shadowed figure, the name spoken off camera, the sudden bold declaration, the cut signal, the empty chair. Every detail became evidence. Every moment became symbolic. Every theory became possible. Was this a resignation? An abdication? A breakdown? A removal? A coup? A confession? Public opinion split into factions instantly. Some said the king had been pressured. Some said he had been threatened. Some said he had been exposed. Some said he had been betrayed. Some said he had finally reached his limit. But none of them had the answer. Not yet. Because the truth, the real truth, would not reveal itself until later. And when it did, it would shatter everything people believed about the monarchy, about loyalty, about power, and about the forces that operate behind closed palace doors. For now, all the world had was a moment, a tear, a sentence, a disappearance, and the chilling reality that they had witnessed the first stage of something far larger, far darker, and far more shocking than a king stepping away from a throne. The replay didn't soften it. It didn't dilute it. It didn't make it less shocking the second, third, or 10th time. If anything, the tear looked even more out of place when viewers watched it again, slowed down, zoomed in, frame by frame. It glistened against the harsh studio lights, catching the edge of the king's cheek before breaking away and falling out of sight. How could something so small, so delicate, so human become the spark that set an entire nation on edge? People had seen royal emotions before. Carefully curated, dignified, symbolic. A solemn expression at a memorial. A softened smile at a hospital visit. A misty eye at a tribute. But never this. Never a tear born not from ceremony, but from collapse. Never a moment where the monarch looked as though holding himself together required more strength than ruling a kingdom. Did you notice it right away? Or did it take a moment to register? A blink, a pause, a sudden tightening in your chest? Because that tear didn't look like sadness alone. It looked like surrender. It looked like confession. It looked like truth. The broadcast analysts tried to rationalize it. They used words like unexpected, emotional, unscripted. They tried to maintain professionalism, but their voices wavered and their eyes betrayed them. And at home, viewers felt something unsettling, a realization that they were witnessing a moment that would be studied, debated, and remembered for generations. The replay continued, circulating online, dissected by commentators, compared to archival footage. And the more people watched it, the more they noticed the details that had gone unseen in real time. The way the king's jaw tightened right before the tear formed. The way his fingers trembled against the edge of the desk. The way his throat constricted as though swallowing pain. The way he stared past the cameras, not at them, as if haunted by someone or something unseen. What had he heard? What had he seen? What had he learned? And more importantly, when? Because that tear didn't feel spontaneous. It felt triggered. Theories multiplied like wildfire. Some said it was personal grief resurfacing. Some said it was the culmination of health struggles. Some said it was family conflict reaching a breaking point. Some whispered that it was something far more explosive, something that would unravel the monarchy from the inside. But the most chilling theory was the one that viewers began to suspect without saying aloud. What if the king had discovered a truth moments before going live? The internet picked apart every second of the footage. People enhanced audio. They isolated background sounds. They slowed down micro-expressions. They compared the king's demeanor to past appearances. Coronation clips, state speeches, diplomatic addresses. In every previous appearance, he looked composed, prepared, controlled. This was different. This was a man who looked as though he had received news that shattered him. And the more the footage circulated, the more people began to notice something else, something far more subtle, yet even more telling. The tear didn't fall at the beginning of the speech. It fell right after the king looked down at the folded document. The document that appeared to have been placed there moments before the broadcast began. Who placed it there? Why was it handed to him then? What was written inside it? Viewers rewound the seconds before the tear formed. And there it was, barely noticeable, easily missed, but unmistakable once seen. A hand, gloved, quick, official, sliding the document into place just before the cameras went live. Why the gloves? Why the urgency? Why the timing? The king looked at the document, and his expression changed, not gradually, but instantly, like someone punched in the chest by a truth too brutal to process. His face fell, his breath caught, his shoulders dipped under invisible weight, and then the tear began its slow, unstoppable path downward. People watching didn't know the cause, but they felt the impact. It felt invasive, like glimpsing a private moment never meant to be witnessed. It felt forbidden, like overhearing a secret without understanding it. It felt ominous, like the beginning of something irreversible. Have you ever seen a storm forming in the distance and known, instinctively, that it was headed straight toward you? That was the sensation gripping the nation. The commentators tried to move forward, pretending the moment was normal. They spoke of duty, heritage, continuity. But the audience wasn't listening. They were fixated on that tear because it wasn't just emotion. It was evidence. Evidence that something had happened. Evidence that something was wrong. Evidence that something was about to break open. And then came the public reaction. Fast, chaotic, polarized. Some called for compassion. Some demanded explanation. Some insisted the broadcast be investigated. Some claimed the monarchy was crumbling. Some said it proved the king was unfit. Some said it proved he was more human than any ruler before him. But the debate shifted again when an audio technician enhanced a faint sound captured in the broadcast, a sound no one heard clearly the first time. Right before the tear fell, someone behind the camera whispered a single word. It wasn't clear. It wasn't confirmed. It wasn't acknowledged. But viewers swore they heard it. A name, a warning, a trigger, and that revelation, that the tear might not have been born from emotion but from something spoken, sent shockwaves through the narrative. Because if the king cried because of something whispered, what was whispered? And who whispered it? The replay spread again, now with captions, speculation, theories, lip-reading attempts. Amateur analysts claimed they could decipher the word. Former royal staff claimed they recognized the tone. Psychologists weighed in on the facial reaction. Linguists slowed the audio to extract breath patterns. and every attempt brought the same conclusion. The king's tear was not accidental. It was a response. But a response to what? That question hung in the air, growing heavier with every replay, every comment, every headline. It was the question the monarchy didn't answer. It was the question the broadcasters avoided. It was the question the public couldn't stop asking. And just when the theories reached their fever pitch, someone noticed something else, something even more startling buried in the replay. The king wasn't alone in the studio. There was movement in the reflection behind him, a silhouette, a shift, a presence. Someone was there, someone watching, someone waiting, someone whose identity would change the direction of the story entirely. The realization spread slowly at first, like a rumor carried on a cautious breeze. Then suddenly it accelerated, racing across forums, group chats, news threads, and live commentary streams. People began posting screenshots of the reflection. A blurred shape, a partial outline, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the broadcast frame. Some argued it was a camera operator. Others insisted it was security. But a growing number of viewers noticed something unsettling about the posture, the angle, the stance. This wasn't someone working. This was someone overseeing, someone monitoring, someone making sure the king said, or didn't say, something. And that possibility changed everything. Because if the king wasn't alone, then the tear wasn't just emotional. It might have been suppressed panic, a warning, a response to pressure rather than grief. Viewers began comparing the reflection to past palace staff profiles. Some swore they recognized the outline of a senior advisor. Others claimed it matched the stance of a family member known for influence. A few insisted it belonged to someone whose presence would raise far more questions than answers. But the most haunting detail wasn't the silhouette itself, it was the king's reaction to it. When the figure moved, the king's shoulders flinched. When the figure shifted, the king's breath caught. When the figure leaned closer, the tear fell. The audience couldn't hear what was said, if anything was said at all, but they could feel it. Something about the presence was destabilizing, intrusive, heavy. Have you ever felt someone watching you and known, instinctively, that their purpose wasn't support but control? That was the energy radiating from the broadcast. People began to speculate whether the king's declaration, that he could not continue, was truly voluntary. Had he reached his own breaking point? Or was he being pushed toward one? Was the tear a release, or a signal? Was the resignation an act of agency, or surrender under pressure? And then came the most chilling observation of all. In the reflection, the figure appeared to be holding something. Not a camera, not paperwork, not a headset, but a device. A phone, a recorder, a note, something small, dark, and pointed upward, as if ready to display or deliver information at the exact moment the king looked down. And it aligned perfectly with the moment the tear formed. The timeline became impossible to ignore. The device lifted. The king looked down. The tear began. The breath faltered. The voice cracked. Suddenly the narrative shifted again. What if the document on the desk wasn't the source of the reaction at all? What if it was something shown to him off camera? Something so devastating he could not hide the impact. The audience debated furiously. Was it medical news? Was it political blackmail? Was it a family betrayal? Was it a security threat? Was it a revelation about succession? Was it a scandal buried for decades? No one knew. And that uncertainty only deepened public obsession. News outlets scrambled to keep up, but even the most aggressive tabloids hesitated. They sensed danger in speculation. They sensed consequences in assumptions. They sensed that the wrong conclusion could ignite something uncontrollable. But independent commentators, the streamers, the reaction hosts, the social media personalities, dove in without restraint. They compared frames, analyzed lighting, traced angles, mapped eye movements. And they all arrived at one unsettling agreement. The king wasn't reacting to emotion alone. He was reacting to someone, or something, present in that room. And yet, the palace remained silent. No clarifying statement. No explanation. No reassurance. No denial. That silence spoke louder than the tear ever could. Because if nothing was wrong, why say nothing? Theories evolved again, growing darker, more intricate, more ominous. People wondered whether the resignation had been planned. Not by the king, but by those around him. Was this a removal disguised as surrender? A forced abdication cloaked in emotional collapse? A transition engineered behind the scenes? And then someone uncovered a detail that sent the internet into a frenzy. The king had not been scheduled to speak that day. There was no official announcement, no press advisory, no media calendar entry, no prepared transcript distributed in advance. The broadcast had been arranged rapidly, within hours, with no explanation. Why? What happened that required a sudden televised appearance? Who demanded it? Who approved it? Who resisted it? Who enforced it? The tear no longer looked like the beginning of the moment. It looked like the result. The audience rewatched the footage again with new eyes, and they noticed something else, something subtle, but impossible to dismiss once seen. Right before the tear fell, the king mouthed a word. Unspoken, soundless, barely perceptible, but readable. Help. Not proclaimed, not shouted, not voiced, but whispered silently, like a person trapped inside a performance they could no longer endure. Was it truly that word? Was it something similar? Was it a trick of shadow and lips? No one could say with certainty, but the possibility alone deepened the tension. And then, as speculation peaked, someone posted a slowed version of the footage synced with an enhanced audio track. And this time, something terrifying aligned. The king mouthed the word at the exact moment the shadowed figure stepped closer. Coincidence? Meaning? Signal? The public didn't know, but they felt something primal, a sense that the moment wasn't just emotional, but dangerous. And then came the final detail that sent the first true wave of panic across the nation. A viewer captured a freeze frame of the king's hand, the one gripping the edge of the desk, and circled something most people had overlooked. His fingers were shaking not from age, nor from sadness, but from fear. The trembling wasn't mild. It wasn't the subtle unsteadiness of age or emotion. It was the kind of shaking that comes from adrenaline, from the body reacting to something the mind cannot control. A primal response, a survival instinct. Viewers recognized it even if they couldn't articulate it. Humans know fear when they see it. And that realization changed the tear from a symbol of sadness into something far more alarming. Because if the king was afraid, then the audience was no longer watching a moment of fragility. They were watching a moment of threat. Threat from whom? Threat from what? Threat from inside or outside the palace. Nobody knew. But the visual evidence continued piling up like a case file forming in real time. People noticed the king's eyes darting. Not randomly, but toward a specific point beyond the camera. Toward the shadowed figure. Toward the source of pressure. The king wasn't lost or dazed. He was checking, monitoring, measuring risk. And the tear fell right after that check failed. Was he looking for permission? Was he looking for rescue? Was he looking for courage? Or was he looking for confirmation that he was trapped? The public watched the footage again, and this time they noticed something else. Something subtle, but chilling. The king didn't inhale before the tear formed. He stopped breathing. His chest froze. His throat tightened. His eyes widened just slightly. That wasn't emotion. That was shock. What shocks a king? A revelation. A betrayal. A loss. A threat. A truth withheld until the last possible moment. And suddenly, every theory evolved into a single terrifying possibility. The king learned something moments before the broadcast. Something so devastating that his body reacted before his mind could conceal it. People began compiling timelines. When did he arrive? Who approached him? Who handed him the document? Who spoke to him off mic? Who positioned the shadowed figure? Who ordered the broadcast? And the biggest question, why did the king agree to go live if he was in no condition to do so? Unless he didn't have a choice. That idea snowballed quickly. Commentators softened their tone. Critics grew cautious. Even comedians who mocked the monarchy fell silent. Because if the king wasn't acting of his own will, then the tear marked not weakness, but captivity. Theories spiraled. Some said political factions wanted him out. Some said internal royal forces had reached a breaking point. Some said foreign pressure was involved. Some whispered the most dramatic theory of all. The king wasn't stepping down, he was being removed. And suddenly, the tear became a symbol of resistance rather than collapse. A message, a signal, a plea. People began to feel protective, anxious, unsettled. They wondered whether they had just witnessed a cry for help disguised as a moment of vulnerability. They wondered whether the monarchy was facing a silent internal war. They wondered whether the tear was the first visible sign of a crisis long hidden from public eyes. And just when the theories reached their peak, someone noticed one last detail in the footage. A detail so small it could be missed, yet so significant it reframed the moment completely. As the tear reached the edge of the king's jaw, the reflection in the polished desk surface showed something the main camera didn't. The shadowed figure moved closer. Not a step, not a shift, a glide, like someone positioning themselves to intervene the moment the king said too much. And that was when the king said the trembling sentence that would ignite the world. I cannot continue. Not in the future, not in theory, but now. The tear, the fear, the reflection, the pressure, all converged into a single moment of collapse. And the audience finally understood why the air felt so heavy, why the silence felt so sharp, why the moment felt so historic. They weren't watching a king step down. They were watching a king being pushed. And the most haunting part wasn't the tear, or the whisper, or the shadow, or the document. It was the look in the king's eyes right after he said the words. Not relief, not sadness, not regret, but defiance. A flicker of rebellion. A final act of control. A message spoken through expression rather than speech. As though he knew that saying the words aloud would trigger a chain reaction that could no longer be stopped. As though his resignation wasn't the end, but the beginning. And while the world fixated on the tear, few noticed the most important clue of all. The king smuggled a truth into that broadcast, a truth hidden not in his words, but in his expression. A truth the public wouldn't decode until the next stage of the crisis unfolded. Because the tear wasn't the story. It was the warning. The moment the broadcast returned after the brief technical interruption, viewers noticed something subtle but impossible to ignore. A folded paper rested on the polished surface of the king's desk. One he glanced at repeatedly, each time with a visible tremor in his hand. It had been there for mere seconds, yet it dominated the frame in a way that made the audience lean closer, squinting, trying to decipher its significance. Was it a speech? A list of talking points? Or something far more personal, far more urgent? Analysts, commentators, and everyday viewers alike fixated on it. Some speculated that the paper contained instructions. Others thought it might hold a resignation statement. A few suggested a hidden warning, perhaps even a threat. And in the weeks that followed, experts dissected every angle, every shadow, every movement around the paper, searching for hidden meanings that might explain the king's public unraveling. Because everyone understood one thing clearly. The paper was no ordinary document. The way the king's fingers lingered near it, the way his eyes darted down repeatedly, the way his breathing changed. It all suggested the message was personal, direct, and possibly devastating. And the audience, whether consciously or not, felt the weight of that significance pressing through the screen. In a broadcast that would soon become iconic, the paper became a focal point. Observers noticed the angle, the slight crease in the corner, the subtle fold that suggested it had been handled carefully, perhaps even secretly. This wasn't the kind of item placed casually on a desk for a scripted address. This was something meant to convey a message, a coded communication between the unseen author and the monarch. And the timing was critical. It appeared at the precise moment the king's composure faltered, suggesting a connection between the two events. Viewers began to scrutinize the sequence. The king enters the room, sits, glances at the document, hesitates, inhales sharply, and then the tear. The chain reaction was almost mechanical, almost ritualistic. It was as if the message had been carefully engineered to provoke a specific response, or to test whether the king could withstand the revelation. The psychological intensity of the moment was palpable, and it rippled across screens worldwide, igniting social media commentary, live debates, and viral discussion threads. Did someone send him a warning? Viewers asked. Was it a threat? Or a plea? Commentators wondered aloud. Who could know something that powerful, that specific? People speculated frantically. The mystery deepened when investigative journalists noticed an odd detail, a slight shadow beneath the folded paper. It wasn't consistent with the angle of the studio lights. It appeared almost like a signal, a marker, a sign that the document had been positioned deliberately. Could it be a code? A secret mark to indicate who had delivered it? Or was it a coincidence, magnified by the high-definition camera? Every clue, every nuance, only fueled the speculation. Meanwhile, the king's behavior around the desk was telling. He adjusted the paper slightly, almost imperceptibly, but his hands shook as he did so. He tapped it lightly, as if counting seconds or testing for hidden content. His eyes flicked up at the camera and then back down, a glance full of unspoken communication, a silent signal to those in the know. The audience didn't understand the subtlety, but they felt the tension, the unspoken narrative that hovered above the polished surface. What could possibly be written on a single sheet that would provoke such a public display? Observers offered theories, perhaps a legal disclosure, revealing information previously hidden from the public. Perhaps an internal royal memo, exposing secrets about the family's succession plans or internal disputes. Perhaps a message from a confidant, one meant to guide, warn, or influence the king in the critical moments before the broadcast. The timing, of course, was everything. The folded document arrived just before the cameras turned live. That sequence suggested intent. Whoever prepared it knew exactly when and how it would intersect with the king's appearance. The precision implied planning, strategy, and urgency, not mere coincidence. And in the world of palace intrigue, precision is never accidental. Then came the small details that fascinated the public and analysts alike. The way the paper caught light differently from the surrounding desk. The slight movement as the king's hand brushed it, causing an almost imperceptible shift. Even the angle at which it rested suggested that someone had carefully considered how it would appear on camera, perhaps anticipating that the world would see it, even if only subconsciously. And the crease in the corner? It looked intentional, almost like a tactile marker, a guide for handling, a subtle clue about its content or origin. Speculation reached a fever pitch as theories ranged from plausible to outrageous. Some claimed it was a confidential report detailing a scandal that could destabilize the monarchy. Others suggested a more personal dimension, a letter from a family member revealing a betrayal, a confession, or a demand. A growing faction theorized that the paper contained instructions from advisors, perhaps urging the king to take action, make a statement, or resign. And a few dark whispers suggested something even more extreme, that the folded document was not just informative, but coercive, a silent pressure that forced the monarch into a public display of vulnerability. Audiences were riveted because of how little they knew and how much they could imagine. The mind fills in gaps faster than reality can, and the world's imagination ran wild. What could be so powerful that it could trigger a monarch's terror, a tremor in his hands, a faltering in his voice, and a sense of exposed vulnerability before millions? But while the public speculated, the palace maintained silence. Press statements were vague, officials refused to comment, and aides walked the line between visibility and invisibility, offering nothing to clarify the significance of the paper. That void only intensified speculation. People realized that the absence of explanation was itself a clue. The information was so sensitive, so destabilizing, so potentially dangerous, that silence was the safest strategy. Meanwhile, amateur analysts and social media sleuths dissected every pixel. Freeze frames revealed slight markings on the folded paper, tiny indents, possibly from a signature or stamp. The crease lines suggested careful folding, perhaps intended to convey authority or authenticity. Viewers debated whether it was handwritten, typed, or printed, and how that might indicate the author's identity. Each small detail fed the narrative, that this was not just a paper, but a message crafted with deliberate intent, designed to provoke, to guide, to manipulate, or to warn. And as the king's attention lingered on it, the audience noticed something even more telling. He did not look at the cameras while glancing at the paper. He did not look at the teleprompter. He did not even glance at the anchor beside him. He looked past the frame, as if seeking confirmation, counsel, or permission from someone unseen. That gaze, fleeting yet unmistakable, suggested that the document's influence extended beyond mere information. It held authority. It carried consequence. It dictated reaction. The room's atmosphere, captured subtly in the broadcast, reinforced this. Even the microphones seemed to carry tension. The silence between words was audible, almost uncomfortable. The king's breath, measured yet shallow, punctuated the weight of each moment. Observers felt the suspense tighten, as if the very air in their homes had thickened along with the broadcast. Every viewer leaned forward, unconsciously holding their breath, waiting for the next reaction. And then, just as the king's hand brushed the edge of the document again, a small sound reached the microphones. A barely perceptible click, perhaps from the desk or from the paper itself. It synchronized with a shift in the king's posture, an almost imperceptible nod, a signal the audience couldn't interpret. But the timing was undeniable. The paper was not inert. It interacted with him, guiding the cadence of his expression, influencing the rhythm of his gestures, shaping the emotional architecture of the broadcast. The message on the desk, whatever it contained, had accomplished its purpose. It had punctured the facade, elicited vulnerability, and guided the narrative in a precise, controlled direction. But the public remained in suspense, desperate to decode what it said, who sent it, and why. And just when speculation reached its peak, a revelation emerged that no one anticipated. The document was not alone. Another piece of paper, smaller, partially obscured, tucked beneath the first, was revealed in a fleeting moment when the king adjusted the top sheet. Viewers caught a glimpse of a faint watermark, perhaps an official seal, perhaps a signature, perhaps something else entirely. And that fleeting glance was enough to ignite the first serious theories about covert communication, hidden instructions, and secret pressures influencing the broadcast. Who had sent it? Why had it been delivered in such a precise manner? What did it mean for the king's decisions? The king's eyes lingered on the top sheet of the desk for one long, deliberate moment, as if weighing the consequences of every word it contained. Every second stretched, taut as a wire, and the audience felt it in real time. Millions watched him breathe, saw the subtle shifts in his posture, and sensed the internal calculus taking place behind that public facade. What decision would he make? Would he read the instructions silently, follow them obediently, or act on instinct and break protocol entirely? The suspense was unbearable, electric, almost physical. Meanwhile, commentators struggled to fill the silence. Their words were cautious, tentative. He appears to be referencing notes, one stammered. Perhaps a new policy announcement, another guessed. But their guesses rang hollow. The public knew better. Something personal, something explosive, something unprecedented was about to be revealed. And everyone wanted to see it unfold. The folded paper wasn't just a document. It was a catalyst. Observers began to analyze the way the king's fingers trembled as they brushed the edges. He didn't pick it up. He didn't unfold it fully. He simply acknowledged its presence. And that acknowledgement, subtle as it was, sent a silent message to those watching closely. This wasn't ordinary communication. This was a trigger for action, for emotion, for revelation. It was designed to elicit a reaction, and it succeeded. Speculation surged online. Social media feeds flooded with theories. Was this an instruction from a trusted advisor, a warning from a political entity, or a veiled threat from within the family? Was it evidence of a scandal too sensitive for the public? Or perhaps a directive to force a resignation under pressure? People debated endlessly, scrolling through freeze frames, zooming in on corners, examining shadows, seeking answers that weren't coming. Every detail mattered, every nuance was scrutinized, and every second increased the suspense. Then came the small, almost imperceptible clue that changed the narrative entirely. As the king's hand moved slightly, brushing against the edge of the top sheet, the lower piece of paper shifted just enough to reveal a faint emblem. A royal crest, partially embossed, perhaps indicating authenticity, authority, or secrecy. Observers noticed immediately. The watermark implied official sanction. The smaller sheet was no random note. It was deliberate, calculated, purposeful. It carried weight beyond the words written on it. It signaled legitimacy, intent, and consequence. People speculated furiously. If this document had been delivered with such precision, who could have orchestrated it? A senior royal aide? A political intermediary? A family member with influence? Every theory carried more intrigue than the last, because if the king was responding to this message publicly, it suggested that the stakes were higher than anyone could have imagined. This wasn't simply a tearful breakdown. This was a moment where authority, loyalty, and truth collided on live television. The king's gaze, meanwhile, never left the desk. He seemed to be reading between the lines, interpreting subtle cues, absorbing the full weight of the communication before him. Every millisecond of hesitation amplified the tension, The audience held their collective breath, sensing that the next words he spoke, or the next move he made, would define the trajectory of the monarchy. And even more unsettling, they didn't yet know who was in control of the message he was receiving. And then came the first ripple of clarity. The king's fingers lifted slightly, brushing the top sheet to reveal the faintest glimpse of a handwritten note beneath. A signature? A cryptic annotation? A final instruction? Viewers couldn't tell. But the movement was deliberate, controlled, and deliberate enough to suggest intention. The king wasn't fumbling. He wasn't distracted. He was responding, consciously, to the hidden message in a way that would shape the broadcast in real time. What could have been written there that demanded such focus, such restraint, such visible tension? Analysts suggested possibilities. Confidential information regarding succession disputes, financial irregularities, personal betrayals, or even threats from factions within the palace. Every theory heightened the sense of anticipation. Every guess carried an implied danger. And the audience couldn't look away. The emotional weight of the moment intensified as the king lifted his head, eyes scanning the room subtly, checking the cameras, the anchors, and perhaps, most importantly, the unseen figure that seemed to be overseeing the broadcast from the shadows. The folded papers lay at the intersection of authority and coercion, knowledge and secrecy, public appearance and private tension. Their presence transformed the broadcast from a formal address into a live psychological drama unfolding before millions. As the seconds stretched into minutes, viewers began to notice microexpressions that hinted at deeper meanings. The corner of the king's mouth twitched subtly, a fleeting gesture of frustration or disbelief. His eyebrows drew together slightly, signaling concentration, irritation, or shock. The hand that hovered near the papers didn't shake randomly. It trembled with the burden of information, the weight of expectation, and the pressure of imminent decision-making. Every gesture became evidence. Every reaction, a clue. And then, just when tension had reached its peak, a subtle sound entered the audio feed. Barely audible, almost imperceptible, but enough to send a ripple of speculation across forums and live chats. A faint rustle, a whisper of movement behind the desk. The audience froze. Was someone else in the room manipulating events? Was the king being guided, warned, or coerced? The timing aligned perfectly with the shift of the papers, suggesting a connection that added layers of intrigue to an already tense moment. The audience's collective pulse quickened. Millions of people were now engaged not only with the tear that had started the incident, but with the hidden message on the desk, a message whose significance remained mysterious yet undeniably powerful. Was this the cause of the king's breakdown? The catalyst for his resignation? The trigger for a public disclosure yet to come? The questions multiplied faster than anyone could answer. And just when the tension felt unbearable, one more detail emerged. A clue overlooked by casual viewers, but seized upon by those intent on decoding the broadcast. The shadow of a hand moving over the smaller sheet beneath the top paper. A deliberate, controlled motion, almost imperceptible, as if signaling something to the king without words. The implication was staggering. Someone had engineered not only the delivery of the message, but also the visual cues to guide the king's reactions, manipulate the narrative, and communicate silently during a live broadcast. The hidden message on the royal desk was no longer a simple note. It was a device of psychological orchestration. It was a signal, a warning, an instruction, and it had succeeded in its purpose. The king's tear, his trembling, his visible struggle were now framed by the invisible hand guiding the narrative. But the full significance of that message, who sent it, why, and what it meant for the king's next words, would not be revealed immediately. That revelation would come later, cascading through the story like a tidal wave. And when it did, the world would realize that this seemingly small sheet of paper had been the spark for an entire chain of unprecedented events. The king's fingers hovered over the smaller sheet for a moment longer, as if weighing the consequences of touching it, of acknowledging it, of responding. Each second was a deliberate eternity. Millions of viewers sensed the invisible tension in the room, the weight pressing down on the monarch's shoulders, the silent calculation taking place behind the tear-streaked composure. The document had become more than paper. It was the fulcrum upon which the next chapter of the monarchy would pivot. Observers dissected the king's gaze, noting the way it flickered between the cameras, the teleprompter, the anchors, and the papers before him. His eyes didn't just read. They scanned, assessed, measured risk. And in that scanning, in that brief moment of subtle eye movement, viewers began to speculate that the king wasn't just reacting emotionally. He was negotiating internally, weighing options, calculating the response that would carry the maximum impact while exposing the minimum vulnerability. Every glance was intentional, every micro-expression loaded with significance, every second pregnant with consequence. Speculation ran rampant online. Social media feeds filled with screenshots, slowed-down videos, animated GIFs capturing the precise moment of tension. People compared frames from different camera angles, looking for clues. Was the watermark on the smaller sheet a royal seal, a signature, or a code? Was the fold deliberate, or had it been accidentally aligned by the hand that delivered it? Every minor detail became the focus of intense scrutiny. Millions of minds raced to decode meaning from the most subtle signals, driven by a mix of fear, curiosity, and awe. Meanwhile, the king's body language continued to communicate unspoken truths. The slight slump of his shoulders, the tight clasp of his other hand on the desk, the barely audible intake of breath as he adjusted the paper. Each movement was like a word in a silent conversation with the unseen author of the message, a negotiation taking place in microseconds that the public could witness but not fully comprehend. It was human instinct, royal discipline, and unspoken panic interwoven into a display that would define the broadcast for decades. Then came a detail that few noticed initially, but that would later prove crucial: a subtle shadow shifting beneath the smaller sheet, as if someone behind the scenes was manipulating the placement of the paper, ensuring it remained in precise alignment for the cameras. Observers noticed the motion, analyzed it, and concluded it was deliberate. Someone wanted the king to see this, to respond, to be guided in his actions. And that revelation ignited new speculation. Who was orchestrating this moment? What leverage did they hold? And what was their ultimate objective? The silence of the king during this sequence was deafening. He didn't speak. He didn't fidget excessively. He didn't even glance at the anchors beyond the most cursory acknowledgement. Instead, he remained still, absorbed, absorbing, processing. The tension mounted to a nearly unbearable pitch. Viewers felt it viscerally, as if the air in their living rooms had thickened, as if every heartbeat synced with the unspoken drama unfolding on screen. Questions multiplied exponentially. Was this document a trigger for resignation? A confession? A warning? A revelation? Or a mixture of all four? Could a single sheet of paper, delivered with precision, hold the power to crack a monarch in front of the world? And if so, what did that imply about the people behind its creation and delivery? Then came the most telling clue of all: a tiny, almost imperceptible crease on the corner of the smaller sheet, one that suggested it had been folded in a specific manner to indicate hierarchy or authenticity. Analysts on social media debated its meaning for hours. Some argued that the crease was a deliberate signal, a coded instruction indicating that the king must act immediately. Others suggested it marked the message as sensitive, confidential, and dangerous, requiring a controlled and calculated response. Either way, the implication was clear: this was no ordinary correspondence. As the broadcast continued, viewers noticed subtle changes in the king's demeanor. The tremor in his fingers intensified, but only slightly, enough to suggest internal struggle. His lips pressed together as though tasting each word before committing to speech. His brow furrowed minutely, a sign of concentration, frustration, or perhaps suppressed outrage. Every gesture amplified the sense of high-stakes drama. This was a monarch under pressure, influenced, guided, and possibly threatened, and the audience could witness it in real time. And yet, even as tension mounted, the king made no move to conceal the smaller sheet. He did not hide it, fold it away, or place it aside. That choice alone spoke volumes. It was a silent acknowledgement of the message's authority and relevance. It was an unspoken concession that the information contained within could not be ignored. It was a decision to engage with whatever forces had brought this moment into being, a decision that would set the stage for the unfolding crisis. Then, finally, A subtle but unmistakable reaction occurred. The king's hand lifted, brushing the top sheet aside just enough to reveal the full emblem on the smaller sheet beneath. The watermark became clear, an official seal, faint yet undeniable. Observers and experts concluded immediately that this indicated legitimacy and origin, a message sanctioned by someone with authority, someone who could enforce consequences, someone whose instructions could not be ignored. The king's compliance, even partial, confirmed the influence of the unseen author. The audience watched in suspense, breathless. Each microsecond now carried weight. The king's reaction to the hidden message, the small movements of his hands, the brief adjustments of the paper, the subtle shifts in posture,